Hello, Internet. Welcome to another episode of the Experimental Cataclysm. If you are new here, this is the show where we talk about the updates that have come to the experimental version of Cataclysm over the last 2 weeks. There is a fair bit I want to talk about this week. We've had an influx of content and interface stuff, so quite a bit to talk about. So let's just jump into it because it's physically painful for me to have this many tabs open in Chrome. And also, I promised myself I could get coffee, but not until after I finish the video. So, first up from Jamuro, we have added batch time savings for scrambled eggs. So this is really straightforward. I just wanted to mention it because there are so many items in the crafting menu, particularly food items, that don't get a benefit from batch time saving. So if you don't know what that means, it means that let's say we were making one scrambled egg, it might take, let's just say, 2 minutes. And if we were making 2 scrambled eggs, it would take us 4 minutes, and 4 scrambled eggs would be 8 minutes, and so on and so forth. With batch time savings, that actually gets reduced. So instead of 2 eggs taking the length of time to cook 2 individual eggs, it will get a savings that reduces the overall time for crafting in a larger batch, which makes sense. Obviously, a pan can accommodate more than 1 egg at a time, so you could scramble multiple eggs all at once and save yourself a bunch of time. And the only reason I mention this really is because there are so many food items that don't have this, and there were 1 or 2 this week that added batch time savings for crafting. So just wanted to shout this out a little bit. I think I even in a video recently commented specifically about scrambled eggs not having batch savings. So it's always nice to see stuff like that come down. Really not super significant, but it'd be great if someone went through and audited all those recipes, because there are a lot that could do with batch time savings. Moving on, from another simulacrum, we have display proficiencies contained in a book. So books can help you with proficiencies. It will specifically say now at the bottom of a book entry what proficiencies it will help with. So here we have an example where it shows that plastic working will be helped on this book. People are mentioning color coding it, so that may change in the future. But for now, when you look at books and they can help you with proficiencies, it will be listed at the bottom. Proficiencies are a point of frustration for a lot of people, and I think that making it more visible like this is just a plain old good step. So nice to see that coming down the pipeline. Next, from Elsagsev, we have added Chitin Leg Guards. So we don't have Chitin Leg Guard. Again, I think we mentioned this recently in a video. Chitin Leg Guards do not exist. We had Chitin armor, helmets, gauntlets, arm guards, things like that, but we did not have leg guards. The Chitin armor covered both the torso and the legs, if I recall correctly, but that's not always optimal. Like for me personally, I prefer to wear like Kevlar and other types of chest armor. So wearing a chitin armor on my chest is not really desirable, but I still want leg protection. So now I have the option of crafting chitin leg guards, which will protect my legs explicitly. I don't know if they needed to be added to the game, but it certainly is helpful, and there's really no reason that they shouldn't exist. So that's nice, and I wanted to shout that out as well. Next, here's the first change I kind of have a problem with. So from Guralub, who I believe they got their first contribution this week, or in 2 weeks ago. So always nice to see a first-time submission person, although it seems like several weeks ago, so just bear with me. They've made all chainsaws fragile. Now, I have no issue with chainsaws being less viable as a weapon. They're actually quite ridiculous thing to consider using in combat. Chainsaws are not designed for combat, and anytime I see people on Discord post the chainsaw like Lajatang or something like that, I always just roll my eyes because it's such a memey thing. That said, flimsy is a terrible flag, and so basically, if you don't know, let's have a look here. There's a flag called Fragile Melee. Now, Fragile Melee is what makes knife spears flimsy. So in Cataclysm, there's 3 possible durabilities on an item. You can have sturdy, which means that it resists damage. It can be normal, or it can be fragile, which means it breaks very quickly. My problem is not that they've nerfed chainsaws by making them fragile. I think that that's actually a good change. I think it's real dumb to use a chainsaw in the zombie apocalypse as a weapon. It's not meant for combat. What I have an issue with is the Fragile Melee flag itself. There is just it's too much. Like, how often, anyone who's listening to this probably knows what I'm talking about. How often have you made a knife spear, gone into combat with a single enemy, and walked away with needing to craft a new knife spear because yours is damaged to the point where it's no longer functional? One combat encounter is not enough for even a fragile piece of equipment. It just should not be breaking down that quickly. A chainsaw, although it is a flimsy thing that's not designed for combat, should not be able to break down after engaging one enemy. They're not that flimsy. And unfortunately, with the flimsy melee flag, it's an all or nothing. There's no levels to it. It is just either flimsy or it's not flimsy. So I think that the change itself is fine. I think making chainsaws more, or rather less viable as a weapon is a totally fine change. But I still think that the fragile flag needs to be reworked. I've thought that for really since its implementation. I wanted to support the knife spear changes that they came down with, but flimsy itself is too penalty. It's too much of a penalty, and there really needs to be levels to it, because obviously a chainsaw, for instance, like a gas-powered handheld chainsaw or even a combat chainsaw, is more durable than a flimsy knife that you've basically tied to a stick, right? I think there needs to be different layers on how severe the flimsiness is. So I'm not a fan of the flimsy tag. I think this is fine, but ultimately I think flimsy, the more we add flimsy to items, the more and more frustrated the player base will become, and eventually will, I think, force a change in that, because I don't think the fragile flag is a very good solution to these problems, really. If that even makes sense. I'm feeling a little rambly. Let's just move on. Not a fan of the flimsy tag. Next, from Knight Prianic, we got a warn player about X is dangerously close. So this is actually a huge quality of life improvement. So previously, basically, no matter where you were, if a zombie, let's here, for example, they're reloading. If you were reloading and a zombie was nearby, it would constantly prompt you saying, "Are you sure you want to keep going? Because there's a zombie dangerously close." The problem with that is that they could often be in a position where the zombies can't actually get to you, but it would give you these prompts anyway. So, you're in a lab, you're reading next to a glass door, or the example here, they're separated from you by a barred door that they have no ability to get through. And so Knight has gone through and made it so that the zombie actually needs to have a path to you in order for this to pop up. So after this change, in this situation, you start reloading, you would not get the pop-up because this zombie cop is not capable of reaching you. So it's actually kind of a huge quality of life thing, to not be constantly interrupted when you're trying to do things. Certainly everyone who's played Cataclysm has experienced this. It can be extremely frustrating and annoying. Those messages serve a valuable purpose. I think that not being able to turn them off is actually a good thing, because I think people would turn them off and then be very frustrated that they were not getting warnings. But making it so that it has a little bit more logic to where you can apply, like, okay, well, yes, there's a zombie here, but there's no way he's coming through these glass bars or metal bars to get to me. That's just not going to happen. And so we don't need the message. So I really like seeing this. I think this is a really, really good thing that that he has added. And yeah, so that's pretty cool. Pretty cool. Moving on. Next, from Xenomorph, we have added a basic swimmer zombie to the game. So, as far as I understand, the point of this PR is that swimmer zombies that we had in the game, say a couple weeks ago, were actually partially mutated, because they apparently have webbed hands and feet, which I did not know. I've never really looked, I guess, at their description. So they're being described as having webbed hands and feet, which implies that they've been mutating. Obviously, that's a bit odd to have a mutated creature on day one. We don't really have those. Usually on day one, it's very standard zombies. And so Xenomorph has added a basic swimmer zombie. What I don't like, and changed the old swimmer zombie to a webbed zombie. What I don't like about this is that the webbed zombie is actually like pretty identical to your standard swimmer, which I think is like the basic swimmer zombie that we had before was already basically identical to a standard zombie stat-wise. And so now we're making that a higher tier zombie, but unless you changed its stats to reflect that, I don't think that it really does very much, which it doesn't. All it did was change the name of that zombie. So basically now we have a base level swimmer zombie, which is, I know it's confusing because they renamed it the same thing. So a zombie swimmer now is a very basic, day one normal, basically a normal creature, but I'm assuming it's just clad, like wearing swimwear. I saw the word clad up here, clad in swimwear. And then we upgrade that to the webbed zombie, I guess. So the ID of the webbed zombie is still zombie swimmer. Okay, well, that's very confusing. But basically, it looks like their stats are going to be pretty identical. So it just seems like a pointless extra creature. And the only reason for that is because you didn't want to have a low tier mutated creature, which is fine and makes sense. We don't really have day one mutated creatures, but I just saw this. It was like, I don't think that was really necessary. So you should start seeing swimmers and webbed zombies. It looks like they may have removed the swims flag from the swimmer, which is super odd because it's literally called, it's a swimmer zombie and it can't swim, which I think is super odd. But I don't know how to feel about this. I don't feel that this was really necessary. I don't think it hurts anything, but I don't think that it was necessary really at all. Let's just move on. Next from, Giorno Giovanni, I'm going to say. Added health indicator in eat menu. Again, pretty big quality of life change that we got. And this one is specifically with the interface. So in the eat menu, you can actually, this is not what it looks like anymore. Let me pull up the game so we can look at it in the game. Alrighty, so now in the eat menu, you will see a display. No, don't examine. Oh, I have caps locks on. Now in the eat menu, you will see a display for health. This is really nice because previously there was literally no way, as far as I know, no way for the player to know whether something was healthy or not. Initially, when this was implemented, it actually said like unhealthy, healthy, dangerous, that kind of stuff. I actually prefer the pluses and minuses. Now, I believe they did it specifically because of space concerns. So I play on with everything scaled up 25% when I play Cataclysm. So this is what it looks like for me. But I can understand on mobile devices and things, trying to fit this entire menu scrunched together on a phone screen might cause problems, especially if you have a big listing of an additional word here. So for that reason, I believe is why they mainly changed it. But I also like it because it's more vague. I like the idea of a player having some vague idea of whether something is healthy or not, but not really being able to exactly quantify how healthy or unhealthy the thing is. I'm glad they didn't go, I don't know that it was ever on the table, but I'm glad that they didn't just put the numbers here, right? Because your player doesn't know, oh, well, this is a -2 to my health. Like, obviously, we would not know that as the player. So I like the plus and minuses because they're pretty vague, but they give the player an idea of what is healthy and what is unhealthy. In fact, I've already been surprised by some of this stuff because I believe that aspirin is unhealthy, which is something I didn't even know. And how many times have I, played Cataclysm? I don't think I ever took notice that aspirin is unhealthy for whatever reason. Or maybe I mislooked at the lines, or something, but like it looked unhealthy, which I didn't know until this menu existed. So yeah, now you'll have a vague idea of what is healthy and what is unhealthy. This will make it much, much easier to try to target healthy foods. Previously the logic has been for a long time, just drink lots of tea. That's always been what we said for gaining health. But the reality is that there are many other food items that give you small boosts to your health, and this will make that more apparent to the player. Canned pineapple, I also didn't know this, apparently is healthy. So eating that will improve my health over time. So yeah, I really, really like this. I think this is such a good change and such a huge quality of life thing. There have been, like I said, a few quality of life this week or over the last couple of weeks, and this is just so handy. I really, really like this. And then let's jump into the next change, which is also going to be relevant to this menu. So let's just bump up to the next change here. And from Norse FTX, we got the ability to use, everything's scaled up when I scaled up my display for Cataclysm. This allows Examine to be used in the Eat, Wield, Wear menu, etc. So let's take a look at that in game as well here. So if we're in this menu and we hit the E key by default, it will now pop up the entry for the item that you have selected. This is pretty nice if you're looking for something specific. I can't really think of what I need it for in the Eat menu. Maybe, I don't know, everything's pretty much displayed on the Eat menu, but let's say we look at this wet cat food. We're like, oh God, well, is that dry food or wet food? What is that? So we hit the Eat button. It'll pop up, oh, it's wet food for cats. Well, now we know. So that adds that to this menu. It also adds it to various other menus. I have nothing to wear, but we can do it in the wheeled menu as well. If I hit E, it pops up the item entry. Again, really nice little quality of life thing. You don't have to, how do you do this? It is available in the inventory menu if you just hit the E key, and it'll pop up here. I don't know why that was necessarily, because you can just hit enter and it will bring up that exact same display here alongside multiple other options that are pretty valuable. But I do think it looks nicer in the middle of the screen, and this window is wider, at least currently on my settings, is wider and displays much more of this than it does in this menu, where I would actually have to pan up or down possibly, which is not working for some reason. There we go. So yeah, I do like this. I think that this is a nice quality of life thing. I think it'll take me a little time to adjust to that, but I think it'll be really nice once I do. And we can see here this is usable in the wheeled, wear, reload, read, throw, take off, inventory, eat, activate item, and swap inventory letters menus. So all of those menus now have that ability. They should all be bound to E, I believe. You can check the key bindings in those individual windows, of course, if something goes wrong. And it does not affect compare items, which kind of makes sense, because when you go to compare items, I mean, I guess it would be nice, but once you select them both, they pop up on the screen either way. So I don't know that that's strictly necessary. For the drop menu, I don't know why they didn't add it to the drop menus. It seems like something that would be nice to have, but they've added it to so many menus that, you know, it is a huge improvement. Even if they did not make it for the drop menu, it's still a very good change. So I really like that. And yeah, just such a great, it's just so great. We're getting a lot of these nice little things this week. Next, from Beneficial Insurance, we got more military professions as well as realistic skills to those military professions. So I did take a look at this. I am generally open and encourage people to make additional, I was going to say professions. And I have no problem with the expansion of the military. What I find odd is that some of them are broken down by rank, and then some are broken down by like MOS. So like combat mechanic obviously is not your rank, is your MOS, or combat engineer I think was one. I had a friend who was a combat engineer. And yeah, I mean, I really like the expansion of the military stuff. We have had military professions for a while, but I don't think they've been touched in a really long time. So any amount of expansion to that and growth in that area, and then we rarely get new professions anyway. So really anything that, you know, this kind of stuff is pretty cool. Let's just pick one and take a look at what they've got going on. So here we're, oh, nope. I would like to see combat engineer, sure. It costs 6 points. Starts with marksmanship, rifle, melee, piercing, dodge, first aid, survival, fabrication, mechanics. These are incredibly high. For 6 points, you basically get Fab 6 and Mechanic 6. I mean, there's talk about moving away from the point system anyway. I don't use professions enough to know if that's a reasonable like cost, but like you're also going to start with like guns and stuff, right? You start with C4, okay, but no, you don't start with a weapon. Okay, well, I don't see a weapon in here, so I don't know if maybe I'm missing something, but whatever. So I don't know what the point values exactly are. I don't think there's a system to it. I do think it's kind of arbitrary and up to the person who makes it. But 6 points for Fab and Mechanic 6, those are both really nice to have. And then to start with some C4, it's odd to me they don't have a weapon at all. But I guess they're meant to be like a Demolitions style character. So you start with some C4. C4 is pretty valuable. It can be a little difficult to come across and is a very powerful explosive. So that's interesting. Anyway, regardless of, like, I don't know, but regardless of all of that, we have an expansion to the professions that are military related into the game. I generally like this sort of stuff. I know you guys do too. So yeah, there's that. Moving forward, Zalot 84, we added wooden panel and wooden beam recipes to base camp. So previously in the faction camps, if you set up an NPC faction camp, you would be unable to craft things like wooden panels. In fact, the only things I can remember were logs and planks, and I remember being frustrated when I tried to build my faction camp because you couldn't just use logs and planks for some buildings. Some buildings required other materials, and you had no ability to craft them in the faction camp. So this has added wooden panels from 3 recipes, added wooden panels from nailed planks, wooden panels from wooden beams, and wooden beams from logs. So those are 3 new recipes available to your faction camp, and will help you build out your camp. And this is something that probably should have been added a while back. So it's nice to see that. You can now craft those things in your faction camp, which should make building that camp much, much easier rather than going out and source. I'm sure it's much faster to source them yourself, but depending on where you start the faction camp, maybe you want to do everything from scratch, you know. So really like seeing that. Next, again from Xenomorph, we have a new type of food, a freeze-dried camping meal. So it's kind of like an MRE, but not built to be an MRE. So like, it's not like an MRE is an all-inclusive thing. It contains water purification tablets, a fire source. I think I was gonna say like utensils and stuff, but like, you know, an MRE contains a lot more stuff. Freeze-dried camping meal is just the meal, and in fact, they're just calorie dense food. That's essentially all that it is. And then the way that you actually convert it into regular food is through the crafting menu. So you have the regular freeze-dried meal, which you then craft into a rehydrated meal, which just requires some water, I believe. I don't see the recipe here, but I believe it's just adding water to the freeze-dried meal. Now, because of the way this is set up, sorry about that, got a phone call. So the way that these are set up is using the crafting menu to craft them. And because of that, there's no variety. So let's say we built, like we have like 20, last I counted, which was probably a year or two ago, we had like 29 variants of MREs. If we did that for freeze-dried meals, we would have to have a recipe for each individual freeze-dried meal in order to turn them into a rehydrated freeze-dried meal, because each one would have different calorie counts, would have different, like all that stuff would be different, and that would make it very annoying to do that through the crafting menu. So what they've done is just made a generic freeze-dried meal. Notice it's not called like, what are the MREs called? Like chicken teriyaki MRE and things like that. This is just straight up a freeze-dried meal, and then you just hydrate it. It does reference cooked beef and egg breakfast. I probably wouldn't even have put that in. I would have just had it be a generic freeze-dried meal. But I think that this was the right way to do it. I think it saves a lot of grief with like adding tons of recipes and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, I don't know if there's more stuff like this to come in the future, or if this was the entire implementation that they wanted to do. But it's pretty neat. You know, it adds one more shelf-stable thing that you can kind of pick up and throw on your shelf. 1,400 days. When's the last time you played Cataclysm for 1,400 in-game days? It's, yep, pretty shelf-stable. Moving on. Next, again from Night, pretty small, but nice quality of life change as well. So basically, the way Autodocs work, they've been getting additional functionality. And because of that, they've kind of had these things added to their theoretical inventory. So like an Autodoc can splint a broken wound, a broken limb. So in theory, the Autodoc has splints in its like inventory, and so on and so forth. They were also given the ability to help with radiation. So it's kind of the same thing. They must have like anti-radiation medications in them. And it just didn't really make sense that they didn't have anesthesia. So Night has gone in and added a very small amount of anesthesia into an Autodoc. So now it kind of spawns with an internal reservoir of some anesthetic, which is nice. I don't think anesthetic is really the thing that holds people back. They reference here something about making it easier in the early game to add bionics. I don't know where I saw that. That might be in the actual change log and not on here. I don't know that that's necessarily true. I don't think that anesthetic is usually the thing that holds people back. I think the thing that holds people back is like trying to find the bionics, clean filthy bionics, mend filthy bionics, autoclave, all that stuff. Find the Autodoc in the first place. You got to clear a lab or a hospital or find one, luckily, in a more safe location. So I don't know that this makes it easier per se, but I'm sure that there are people out there who are going to find an Autodoc. They're going to have a few clean bionics, and they won't have anesthetic. So for those people in those situations, this will make things easier. And yeah, I don't know what the charges are based on. I thought each charge was a milliliter, but I'm thinking now that that's incorrect because it says here, contains anesthesia kits. I think this is supposed to be 0 to 6,000 charges. Maybe I'm misreading that. I thought it was saying 0.6 charges, but I'm guessing that's 0 to 6,000. So, man, that'd be crazy because I do think each charge is a milliliter. I might be misremembering. That doesn't really matter. The point is, an Autodoc now has an internal reservoir of anesthetic. So when you first go to the Autodoc and you give it a shot, it should tell you how much anesthetic is in the Autodoc. So, or in the installation bionics menu, it should show you how much anesthetic is available. So, pretty nice, albeit small change. So, yeah, pretty cool. And then finally from Candleberry, this is the one I wanted to talk about a little bit. We have a mission leading to Hub 01 from the evac shelter. I debated putting like a spoiler warning on this, but because it's going to be connected to the evac shelter, it's going to be one of the first things that people learn about in the game. So I don't think that this is hugely spoilery. So if you're not familiar with Hub 01, it's so basically a while back, Candleberry bumped the spawn rate of Hub 01. This led to basically everyone finding it, and that was the point. They were testing the missions and things like that from Hub 01, and the best way to do that was to turn the player base loose and make sure that they came across it pretty frequently. Now, because of those buffed numbers, you would often find one. You would find one on every overmap like section, so it wasn't uncommon to find multiple Hub 01s in a single playthrough. That is the main reason that I mentioned this, because the guaranteed spawn of Hub 01 is no longer guaranteed. It will not be a guaranteed spawn. It has been backed off to a more reasonable thing because that testing, the time for testing has backed off, and it's not strictly necessary to have every player coming across it all the time for bug reporting and stuff like that. So that's like the main reason I wanted to mention it, because a lot of people rely on Hub 01 for trade goods, like the ability to trade with them early in the game. It's pretty easy to find Hub 01. It's very recognizable and whatnot. And additionally, we now have a mission that will lead you there from the evac shelter. So even if it's not a guaranteed spawn, it should be relatively easy to find the location of Hub 01. My guess would be that this will just add a lot more travel time, kind of the way that when you pop in the evac shelter and you get pointed at the refugee center, even though you now know where it is, it might be very, very far away and not really feasible. Even over the course of, several weeks of playing, you might never go over there. So that's a pretty major change, actually, for the people who rely on Hub 01. So I wanted to really make sure that I mentioned this. I like that it's being backed off. I like that Candleberry initially kind of had the stones, so to speak, as to make it guaranteed in the first place, because I do think that really exposes a lot more players to it and gets a lot more feedback. Hub 01 is one of the more fascinating, maybe not the location itself, but the quest lines that they give you are pretty interesting. They take you to some unique places. There are some very scary things that you will interact with. And yeah, Hub 01 is like my gold standard for what an NPC like location should be. So always, happy to see stuff with Hub 01. And yeah, it's a pretty major change for some people. So I wanted to make sure that we talked about that. So internet, I think that is probably it for this week. I do feel like a little bit rambly. Hopefully everything made sense, but a lot of quality of life stuff this week. Really good stuff that's going to make the game a lot more. Well, some of it is just it will make the game less annoying, and some of it is like genuinely just really good stuff to have. And I think that, like we get a lot of people who come to try to play the game and then complain about things endlessly, like, and they give up. Like, don't get me wrong, I complain about a ton of stuff. Even in this episode, I've complained about things, but like, I love this game despite all of that, and I will stick with this game because I can recognize it's a really solid game. Some players get in the game and they start getting interrupted by all those pop-ups about enemies, even though they're not, capable of attacking them, and they lose their mind and they never want to play again. Seems silly to me and probably to you, but that definitely happens. So that kind of quality of life stuff is always moving the game forward, always making the game better, and I just really like that sort of stuff. I guess, I don't know. Anyway, that's going to do it for this episode. Hopefully everyone had a good time. I'll be back with another episode of the Experimental Cataclysm in 2 weeks, and I'll see you in the next episode.